Well, good morning. Thank you for coming in to listen up to this, and thank you for inviting me. I'm going to give a quick talk to try and give a sort of an overview of some of the things, who operates in education, aid to education, what they do, what kind of things have been achieved, where they might be going with this in a sort of global sense, and then some of the impacts of technology. And I'll try to tie into some of the things that's been talked about already this morning. So open development is a term that's been coined, I guess, suggesting that development work and aid in development work may be open, similar to sort of things like open innovation and other terms of that kind. And so it suggests that it's more participatory, inclusive and distributed in some way. And there's a lot of examples we've seen of this, for example, in humanitarian work, Ushaidi's work, crisis mapping, initiatives such as Publish What You Fund and the Aid Transparency Index are all things that you could put in this category. And UNDP now has an open data portal as well, so it's become mainstream as well, if you like. So what I'd like to do is sort of focus a little bit on what people think about in that area, what they think open development is. Quite often it's about data, it's not just data accessibility, but availability, and people talk a lot about transparency and accountability in this area, and finding ways to overcome roadblocks to development, promote international cooperation, resolve conflicts, and engage citizens and get feedback on government services usually. So, yeah, this is what the claims are anyway, in terms of, or the potential, let's say, to do this. But a lot of people have argued that this isn't necessarily so simple. Data is, data is people, this is from Duncan Edwards at IDS, who is working on the Making All Voices Count project there. And, they pointed out, and many people have said that transparency is a lot harder than accountability, and collecting evidence about, what engages citizens and how that works is not easy. You can make your cake open and catalog and put metadata in there, and that data, it can give you the possibility that other people, other intermediaries can make use of this open information and serve it up in a palatable way to the intended audiences who can then make use of knowledge. But that's a long process, it's a long chain, so it's not so simple how that actually happens, the citizen engagement feedback. So there is an architecture in place for education development. There are a number of organisations that work, but it is in a little bit of a crisis. The aid industry in general, which is from the 1950s, is sort of dire need of change in some senses. Bilateral agencies are closing down. AusAid is no longer in existence officially. The Canadian Aid Bilateral Agency doesn't have a name. It's no longer itself. It's been merged into trade and foreign affairs, so aid industry needs to change. It needs to become something different. And there's a massive lack of funding. For example, UNESCO is another agency that's really hard up at this point of time. There are new people coming into this, emerging donors, and so it's a changing scene. It's a changing world. Social enterprise, CSR, private sector is taking on a much bigger role. So where we've been with education development, there has been, since the first commitments of the Education for All, so the World Education for All movement in 1990 in Jomtien, Thailand, which was a shared commitment of NGOs and development partners and governments and donors based on the principle that education is a human right. And so this is coming to an end, this long sort of push, basically, and it had set targets and 6 goals. Which were to be achieved by 2015. So we'll see next year. But we can say pretty clearly that 2 of those goals will most likely be achieved, and the others are lacking, far behind. So number 2, access to education has been very successful, primary. And gender parity is another area where there has been good success. But in the areas of expanding early childhood care, life skills, as Balaji mentioned, and literacy particularly, and also the quality of education are areas where there needs to be more focus. And so these are priorities. Part of the reason for this is the Millennium Development Goals number 2 and 3 clearly are linked. They are basically the same as the EFA goals. So it's not a surprise that those two goals had a more coherent push. So very quickly then, the MDG goals, which will be at this point in time are being, if you like, revised. There's a whole discussion about what the future goals should be. They have been, in many senses, extremely successful in these ways. They've stipulated time horizons, bound governments to commitments, and enforced some forms of accountability. The UN sort of positives, if you like, is that this changed the world. This had a galvanizing effect, and it created a robust basis for international development assistance. But the problems with this is it's very technocratic and it's top-down and it's not contextualized. So the future goals beyond 2015 need to be much more broad-based, and there needs to be more political dialogue, there needs to be more basis for that from the bottom-up process, and so this is where the data starts to become really important. So there's been a lot of discussion about this and trade-offs for different things. The Sustainable Development Goals are a major discussion point, and so extrapolating the Millennium Development Goals beyond 2015 is still an unfinished agenda, but it definitely needs to account for the changed landscape of emerging realities, growing inequality, economic crises, and things like climate change. So this is not a technical problem anymore, really. The high-level panel, which is has been talking about post-2015 goals, has called for a data revolution, and then this is again talking about transparency and accountability and governance, particularly. And there is a need for much stronger country ownership. Just a point in reference to this, for example, an example might be if you look at Brazil, the National Congress has set up a hackerspace permanently, which is interactive and, for example, will give you visualizations of plenary remarks by members of the chamber. The role of parliamentarians in deciding what happens and the way that technology can carry that is really important for politically smart, I think, thinking about aid and development, rather than what international organizations can do. So decentralized data is important. Particularly for education, data is crucial for planning, budgeting, monitoring, and valuation purposes in education, as we've just seen with Stephen mentioning in Kenya. Ministries of education are the providers of last resort in a country. So their work is essential, and helping them with collection of data, improving what they do is key for improving education. And also the focus on quality of learning. So learning is the new, if you like, the new sort of metrics focus on learning and learning outcomes is a key thing for the future. South-South cooperation is important for the future, I think, and focusing on equity, particularly in equity and the middle ground, is another key topic. And essentially, there is a change in the future of what the Millennium Development Indicators and Goals are created, and a new, if you like, landscape for that needs to, I think, become coherently, is being put together, if you like. So there are many gaps in education process, as I've mentioned. These are things that work needs to focus on. Early education, adult literacy are overlooked, and equity and equality is ignored. Has been ignored over things like access to education at primary level, which have been. And the other thing that has been generally overlooked is higher education. So based on the World Bank's sort of assessment of human capital, the return on investment to children, the rates of return, have won the argument in the 90s that we should invest mainly in primary education, not in higher education. That's turned around now, and there is a much greater focus on investing in higher education and development assistance. It's not turned around completely, but there is a much greater recognition that this is an important thing, and it's important for development outcomes. Quality is a key concern, and as we've heard from Balaji, ways to improve the quality or measure the quality of things like open education resources But this is teachers, as he's mentioned, which I haven't got here, but the teacher gap, the lack of teachers, the missing teachers that will be required, given that we have now achieved the goals in access, we will now need billions more teachers and where they're going to come from is as a workforce planning problem. So it's a serious concern. So they are critical. Then we have the relevance of education, which is whether we're talking about localization into languages, whether we're talking about skills for employability, whether we're talking about global citizenship, but these are all aspects that key aspects for education and development to address, to continue to address, I think. So there is also, of course, still access is not completely, it's not a battle that is completely won. And it's not simply, although there may be 30 million children in Africa who are out of school, there are children out of school in Asia, in all areas, and so it's not simply, it's not a battle that's just over. This is a quote from UNICEF, and it's just saying that it is not a statistical exercise, that we need to have a human rights-based approach to tackling the problems of education. And that we need to link education attainment to other things. And this is important for the idea of linking, in a sense, because education is important for all of these things. So data education and data from other areas should, connect. So, for example, you've got inequality, particularly between rural and urban contexts, and that can be measured, and these are just examples of how important it is to be able to focus on the specifics of a context. Okay, so I'll move on. So these are just some areas for acceleration. Learning outcomes and quality are a key concern, as I've said. So political commitment and financial resources are required for this, and one size does not fit all contexts. That's, I guess, the message here. So there's been work by UNESCO to try and make education data focus more widely on equity and equality issues. So there's a resource here, which is the WIDE resource. Combining national government data and PISA data may be a possibility. Mining big data is a possibility. As we've seen, mining big data, or mining data can potentially bridge complex gaps, and improving data on marginalized groups, which is, of course, going to help widen the impacts. Then we have, obviously, other, blurring boundaries, for example, between different types of data. As I said, data on education, data on child health, child care, building tools, making low-cost mobile devices to collect data, and localization. So these are some potential, I think, opportunities. And these are just some examples of ideas or ways that you could see to apply these ideas. So using data to, for example, to increase an existing voucher scheme for participation in education, collating data together on early childhood education from health records and education to see where your stunting and disability is taking place, to tackle it, because stunting causes more educational deprivation than poor schooling, in fact, because of the nutritional effects. Metadata, so again on peer-to-peer networks, we're maybe using open badges, for example, as they're doing in South Africa with teachers, getting teachers to earn badges in a social way. Report cards detailing school performance is what governments generally do, but that's obviously not enough for tackling all these problems. So these are some open data portals that exist in developing countries already. They are subnational and subsector even. So there are already lots of open data portals that are taking data out there. There is an Open Development Toolkit, which comes from the Open Development, from Open Knowledge. And there is a community of people working around these tools. Now I'm just going to quickly mention some things around globalization and higher education, because I wanted to focus on this being something that is has been overlooked in education development. So higher education clearly is changing, and there is a massive rise of openness and open forms of education, demand for analytics and data, and this is also pushed by business in their demand for complex skills, and so there is increased investment in higher education in emerging countries. And people talk about the business world being volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and analytics is the solution, and agile ways of navigating around this, and learning design is a big key sort of thing that people talk about. And so McKinsey, for example, talking about human capital, will mention things like tomorrow's workplace will look different from today's. You need to pipeline your skilled workers and future workers to be successful. You need to look for engagement. You need to think about business becoming more agile. So these are all things that, if you like, transferring from business into education in some ways, and you'll see that in all kinds of ways. And so we have this sort of pursuit for growth. Sorry, it's not so clear, but it says the creation of new value for customers, shareholders, and drives the need for new stuff, new products, new services, and different from what we currently do. And then this demand for innovation creates a demand for data, if you like, so the desire to control, a tightening grip on everything we do, and predictability and productivity become fine-tuned and optimized. This is kind of the growth paradox that we're seeing, constantly here. And these market forces, they have created great pressures as well on higher education. So these things also, have negative impacts as well. If you think about what educational establishments and universities have to contend with in this setting, they need to change to adapt. So online access journals are ever increasing. So the old way of publishing academic data is in need of adapting to the new circumstances. So we have MOOCs, interest-based communities, and so this is the vision of the old university with the governance and the faculty and the students is sort of, and the 4 pillars of curriculum and teaching and learning and assessment and experience and a degree in research. This is your old model. It's getting sort of eaten away. You've got your edX, Coursera, and then you have different if you like providers, Pearson coming in to if you like break up or disrupt the old organizational institutional model. So you just have a distributed group of people, but then you have other ways that things can be certified and qualifications. The problems are, though, as we kind of mentioned, for higher education, I think I'm trying to link back to what people have said, is the community aspect. So the Open Data Commons here, where is the commons? Where is the, so what is missing? Where are the students? Where is the mentor groups? Where are the alumni and associations, the academic boards, the unions? There is a need for communities to be linked together. So Stefan's talked about how the Linked Up project can, in some ways build these bases for these kind of things, not just analytics. And so Stefan has also talked about the influence of corporations and how this can be quite disruptive, who owns the data. And Balaji has talked about socializing and the importance of this. So I think these are key things to think about in terms of a number of areas. And so helping institutions and systems adapt to the technological change is also kind of a political as well as a social sort of problem. I think I'm going to stop there.
Well, I think we could have given Tom an hour, yeah? I think there was a lot in there and so much, and then people will want to go back to the slides and maybe follow up on some of those things. Does anybody have any questions for Tom? No? Really? Yeah, Bernard?
Sorry, I didn't say, I can't probably comment for Stephen, and linking it to what Bernard presented before. So one of the major challenges I see really in developing countries is not really the lack of technologies. It's rather how people think technologies can be used in online education. And I'm going to highlight this from my experience learning online with the Open University, where I did my MA. So the Open University thought probably the program was completely online. But most of my learning, I would say like 70% was offline.
Offline.
So how did it happen? Well, I was working in a higher education institution. It's called Kigali Health Institute. But they had a campus in the rural place. Well, it's a city in the Rwandan context, but very small. And our campus was the only place where I could access the internet. At some point, it crashed completely.
Okay.
And I had sometimes to take the bus, 3-hour bus trip to the capital city, Kigali, to download the materials, leave them on bus way back to Kigali. And why was I doing that? That's what Stephen was presenting, saying technologies, the system, and people. And linking it to what Balaji said about employability and creating opportunity. So the system at the UK Open University was built so that when I learn, there's value for me. So I can see what I'm getting from it. Then I have to commit that time. That's where the people start coming. Because I could see the value, I could really stick to the program because I see what I'm taking from it. And how did the system enable it? The way the course was built, it could enable learning offline and online. And I could go online only to contribute to activities that required online presence. Then for other activities, I worked on them offline. And when we talk about technology in developing countries, there's technology. Even though they are like the 3-hour bus trip, but it is there. And it can be used to access the materials and disseminate the materials. Now, that's why I come back. We have plenty of OERs, but they're not being exploited. Okay. Because we have one conception for people to learn online, they have to have access to technologies, even in their homes. But that's not all the case. So I have experience, like 6 years or 7 years experience learning. Before moving to the UK, I was learning in Rwanda, taking those courses online in that way. Well, I took many others with GIZ as well. But offline, combining offline learning and online learning was a very powerful, how would I say, organization for being successful. And indeed, I completed the program very well. So we need to go beyond thinking that we need internet everywhere, even in the home for for learning to happen. So we rather need to think carefully. How can we build on the resources which are there, which are not being exploited? Then we open up access to education. That's what I think can be the solution to widening participation in education in developing countries. Otherwise, if we wait so that everyone have access to the internet in their home places, it will take centuries and people will not have access.
Thank you. I think that's a really, really valid point, and I think it's something that probably a lot of us have a misunderstanding about. So I think, yeah, really, really key, having these different modes, these different ways of accessing.